facing the police every single day.
You get the whole thing.
Say hi, Andy. I'm recording you.
All right, you get the whole thing, right?
I got you.
Ocean City cops are not people.
Yes, they are. You know what's really criminal?
What's that?
Those knee-high socks.
I know, but that's what the brown shirts wore.
Banning free speech. What is your opinion of Florida cities banning free speech? I don't know if you heard Punta Gorda, because of the F5 flag, just banning free speech. You can be fined up to $5,000 and be arrested. Ask me how I know. They tried to find me $11,000, probably down to $2,500. Put a lien on my house for free speech. What is there anything that you can pass to stop?
So constitutionally, they can't discriminate you based on the content of the sign. They can only get you for breaking the sign code. I believe that sign codes are way too restrictive. When I was a city commissioner, we rewrote our sign code to give way more discretion, let people kind of do whatever they want with their signs, to an extent like you couldn't have like a balloon going out into the street sign kind of thing in a residential neighborhood, but like generally we let people do whatever they want. Punta Gorda is a super liberal city with some weird, creepy liberal people on the city council. I know that because like it's such a small town. They're one of the first cities. So who's your state rep here? Is it Michael Graham? Yeah. And this is the problem. This is the problem, right? Because it's like, hey, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? What are you doing to make it that your state senator and state rep is taking a stand on that issue? Because the truth is, your local guy could file a bill that strips the city, through a local bill, strips them of all that power in 2 seconds. Or you could have one of your guys pass a bill through that would restrict all the sign codes at the local level. The truth is,
if they answer an email, maybe that would happen.
well, I think you need to recruit a primary opponent in that race.
Which
Who's in the primary?
We only have the building from 9.
Okay.
Thank you. Cool.
That being said, this is still my last opportunity to address the City Council as presently constituted. And I wanted to thank you for your patience and understanding as it relates to the adoption of the new sign code. What gets lost in the debate as to whether or not using the F word on a sign that's visible by children is protected by the First Amendment is that since 2015, when the U.S. Supreme Court adopted its decision in Reed versus City of Gilbert, our previously existing sign code, which was based on content-based categories, was viewed to be unconstitutional because it was an infringement on free speech. In order to be constitutional, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that the ordinances relating to signs needed to be content neutral. And so the code that you adopted, obviously with debate as you went through the process, makes it much greater opportunity for speech to be presented on the signs that are within the city of Punta Gorda, particularly, for example, with respect to political signs. And so rather than repeal the ordinance as was suggested earlier this morning, the ordinance that you adopted greatly expands the rights of free speech within the city of Punta Gorda, and I think you should be commended for that. So thank you. That's all I have.
I was asked a question, as long as we're on this subject, is there any way to pursue civil action against people who are blatantly opposing the sign ordinance and being continuous disruptions? Well, all right, so the immediate answer to your question is no. The disruptions that you may be referring to, from what I've heard during our staff meetings, for example, are more in the nature of verbal disruptions, not necessarily with respect to the signs that violated our sign code. To my knowledge,
there has been no further violation of the sign codes by the two people who received orders against them by the Code Enforcement Board, which are now on appeal. And so to the extent that there aren't any new violations of the sign code, and that's now in the court with respect to their challenge that our ordinance is unconstitutional, we'll ultimately get a decision by the court with respect to that. A motion to stay enforcement against those two individuals will be presented to the Code Enforcement Board at the next Code Enforcement Board meeting. In view of the fact that it's now really in the courts, we'll be recommending to the Code Enforcement Board to grant the stay as it relates to those existing violations. And there's two new violations that were made prior to the notice of appeal being filed, which we're going to continue until after a decision is rendered by the courts. That saves the city additional legal fees and what have you. Certainly the city will enforce any new violation by those gentlemen or anyone else, which is a violation of the sign code, which in fact remains lawful until a court of competent jurisdiction decides otherwise. So I've talked briefly to the police department about the opportunity to deal with disruptions, public disturbances, for example, which are unrelated to the sign code. And so if there's a need to be more aggressive with respect to the enforcement of disturbing the peace, that can still be done. And again, that's not related to the sign code, that's related to verbal expression, which our ordinance does not address.
I ask that for a number of reasons. There is one group that has a church service in Gilchrist Park every Sunday, and the church service has been disrupted, blatantly disrupted, on a couple of occasions. I understand that police would have to be called and they have to witness it firsthand before they can do anything about it. That's one instance. We had the instance at the school where the signage was outside the school entrance, and we also had one over the weekend for an hour on one side of the bridge and an hour on the other side of the bridge with a fetus picture. And I'm sorry, I just think that we're breaching the acceptability threshold.
Well, as the city attorney, I can only advise that there is a fair amount of free speech that is in fact protected by the U.S. Constitution. I've simply advised the City Council that with respect to obscenity as we've defined it, which is based on case law, fighting words as we've defined it, as based on case law, and indecent speech as we've defined it, those are the areas that I think we are comfortable in regulating, because the courts have said those three categories, although it may be content-based, are clearly not protected by First Amendment rights. Other things that we might find distasteful, however, are protected.
Okay.
Now, there may be, one of the things we were talking about is, regardless of what's being said, if someone's on a bullhorn that's turned up, say that 6 blocks away, it's waking people up, and I'm being very facetious, but does that disturb the peace in some manner, regardless of what's being said, aside from the discussion of the content of what's being said? Is there something that's too loud that we can try to prevent if that occurs? And that's a whole different discussion, I believe, than this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, under council member comments, I have a few things.
Ordinance is constitutional.
Well, there could be pushback, according to the attorney I spoke with. He believes it violates the Supreme Court ruling in Cohen versus California, which says a man cannot be charged for wearing a shirt with the F word on it.
While the City Council's heart is in the right place, when it comes to the First Amendment, Americans have a right to be rude to their neighbors.
Attorney Scott Weinberg is talking about this ordinance, banning obscene language from anything that could be viewed in public, like Hillary Caskey's t-shirt.
Yesterday, the shirt I was wearing said, "Apparently I have an attitude. Who knew?"
Someone called police and complained. Caskey got a warning.
One man's vulgarity is another man's lyric. Just because you don't like the word doesn't mean it's any less protected.
Police have handed out 3 fines since the ordinance passed.
The job of the police is to enforce the laws that are on the books. The police don't really have a choice.
Michael Hirsch spoke to City Council about the issue, saying if they passed it, there would be lawsuits.
City Attorney David Levin made it clear that you cannot regulate content. And then they went ahead and did that.
I have the right to say what I want to say and wear what I want to wear, period.
Of the 8 citations, 1 person received a fine of $200 for a second or subsequent offense. Weinberg says this is unconstitutional, period.
You know, the city council, by passing this, just opened up a can of worms. There's going to be lawsuits. It's going to cost the city a lot more money, and they're going to lose. It's just that simple.
Way for pay up. Thanks for watching your NBC2 News at 11. I'm Michael Raimondi. A new sign ordinance banning the display of vulgar language is getting pushback tonight. NBC2's Megan Myers is joining us from downtown, talking to those people who say these signs are their constitutional right.
Tonight, dozens of people showed up to protest the ordinance, saying they don't want to pay up for words they choose to put on display.
I don't talk like that anyway, but I respect the right of other people to speak the way they choose to.
The ordinance bans obscene language from anything that could be viewed in public.
I thought they can't do this.
So that means things like flags, signs, and clothing.
If they're going to try to take away the vulgarity, which I don't agree with as well, I don't like to see that either, but at the same time, what's going to be next?
People against the changes showed up downtown with signs in hand.
I've got my own signs. I'm my own person, and that's the way I've always been.
In a crowd filled with people against the changes, one man showed up in support of it tonight.
Because this ordinance has nothing to do with your Biden flag. It falls into the parameters of it.
Those who don't follow the rules of the new ordinance could end up paying $100 for a first offense and $200 for a second.
What's going to be next?
We've reached out to city officials for a comment. In Charlotte County, Megan Myers, NBC2.
A new sign ordinance in Charlotte County and Punta Gorda sparking a debate over whether it's even constitutional. The new ordinance bans any signs in public places that have indecent language, like swear words.
Well, that's right. So this week, one man decided to break that law in protest. Fox 4's Rob Manch has the story from Punta Gorda.
Richard Massey has spent the last 2 Mondays standing right here outside City Hall holding a sign with the F word on it. He says it's his constitutional right, but the city ended up fining him $100 for his trouble.
I'll be out front with my F Biden flag all day until the cops show up.
On Monday, June 7th, Richard Massey began making his point, with camera rolling, bringing his flag that said F Biden to City Hall. It's a trend we've covered across our area, with people choosing to fly the same flag at their houses. But unlike this video we took in Cape Coral, in Punta Gorda, it's now illegal.
Free speech is not absolute, and we will enforce those types of violations of our sign code.
On June 2nd, City Council passed this ordinance which bans indecent speech on signs in public places in order to, quote, protect and enhance the city's residential character and its economic base.
To me, my rights are totally violated.
I spoke with Massey on the phone about his protest. He says he believes the ordinance is unconstitutional, which is why, even after he got a warning, he came back a second time this past Monday.
I don't care if the city passed an ordinance or not, it's illegal as hell.
Massey isn't the only one frustrated by the new rule. On Facebook, people are already planning a protest for Friday evening at City Hall, with more than 30 people signed up to go. Massey's now facing a $100 fine, but he says he doesn't care.
You do have 10 business days to pay this.
I ain't paying it.
Now, the city tells me it only cites people under the new sign ordinance if it receives a complaint first, and it always gives out a warning the first time. The city tells me so far it's cited 8 people under the new ordinance. Massey tells me he's now looking for a lawyer so he can sue the city. In Punta Gorda, Rob Manch, Fox 4.